I want to start out with some housekeeping. So this is our event space today. The Q&A box that you just used to let us know where you're from and what you're doing. That'll also be where you can put in any questions that you have for myself or for our two speakers today. Again, we'll be talking about onboarding and the onboarding process. And one thing that I was talking about with Courtney before we got started was the timeline of that, and what the onboarding process means differs sometimes for different people. So we'll be jumping into that as well, but definitely feel free to throw in your questions as they come up, and we'll get to them towards the end of this event. But with that, I do want to take a moment to introduce myself and then also our two panelists today. So my name is Neal Strauss. I'm a freelance social media strategist and a Upwork ambassador in the US. I'm the person that, or I'm one of the people that you usually see on some of their webinars and also hosting some of these events. With that, I do want to turn it over. William, let's start with you to introduce yourself and what you're doing.
Hi guys, William Miller from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my company is High Power Data and Design, and we help to automate businesses with a unified digital system that saves them stress, time, effort, and money.
Thank you. And Courtney, want to take it away?
Yeah, I'm Courtney Allen from Atlanta, Georgia. I've been a presentation designer for the past 9 years. I started by working at a Fortune 100 company, and in 2015 decided to kind of jump off and do my own thing. Started freelancing on Upwork to supplement my income and things. Yeah, just started kind of moving from there, and ended up starting a design firm 16 by 9, and yeah, just freelancing full time.
Well, thank you both for joining us today and for lending some of your expertise and some of your advice. So before we jump into the meat and potatoes of things, I'd love to take a look back of kind of where you both started or how you got started freelancing, and a little bit more about what you do. So William, can you tell me a little bit more about High Power Data Solutions and how you started your agency and got it off the ground?
Yeah, it's kind of a unique story. I was actually a pastor for a number of years, and then I started tracking all of my messages and books with the database system using FileMaker Pro, and that slowly grew and grew. Started selling software to other people who also liked it, and so after doing that for a while, we just decided to go full time and switched into the whole business automation, FileMaker Pro database, website development. That whole thing just kind of grew, and I've been doing that now for quite a while. And started with, I think I started with Upwork back when it was still Elance or Odesk or both of those, and then before it merged. So I've been with it for a long time, and it's helped us grow.
Have you ever looked back at your pastor days and missed it?
Every stage is new and exciting, you know. So you enjoy what you're in, and then you move on to something else. So that's kind of where I'm at. So try to bring at least a care element to what I'm doing right now with the clients.
Nice, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
And Courtney, what about you? How did you start in your freelance career, and then how did you pivot to start 16 by 9?
Yeah, for sure. So was always kind of focused on presentation design, even in college. And yeah, once I left the previous company, I actually decided to start a travel company, courting adventure, but realized I had no real plan on how to execute that. So yeah, I kind of got into freelancing to supplement my income from there. And yeah, I just love the flexibility of being able to be remote, and yeah, just as long, you know, with kind of more and more clients and work coming in, yeah, I started bringing on more people, particularly for direct work as well. And yeah, that's how I started the design firm in 2017.
So what's interesting for me about both of you is that these careers of yours were not the first try or the first thing you tried to do. So as you got into these and you started working, you of course started bringing on new clients. So what did that look like in terms of if we can go back and rewind to that first client, what did that onboarding process look like for each of you?
Well, for me, there was initially no onboarding at all. Just like, okay, you want me to do something? Great, hire me and we're gone, you know? And so then as you encounter difficulties and problems and miscommunication, things like that, you figure out, oh, I should probably explain a few things as we go here so we get started. So process of making mistakes is what allowed us to, you know, start developing a more comprehensive process so we all get started off on the right foot.
Nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. To echo what William said, same sort of thing. I really just started by just being so excited to, be able to take on work that, yeah, I was just really just like, let's get up and go. And yeah, a lot of trials and tribulations along the way. I used to just organize everything with sticky notes on my Mac. And that was about it as far as process went.
I think I had a similar process or lack thereof when I first started. I was swept up in the excitement. I'm like, yeah, let's go do it. And then I, kept forgetting things. And as I kept going forward, I was like, I should really start writing this down or trying to do this a little bit better. So what did that look like as you started to figure out those miscommunications or some of those missteps of your own? How did you go about building out your first onboarding process?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
oh,
Courtney.
yeah, I would say a lot of what I saw kind of as far as miscommunications really went with scope or budget. And so those are kind of the two things I really kind of focused on as far as building out with my process. So yeah, for me, one of the most important elements of my onboarding process is after every kind of initial call, before even getting started, I'll send over a proposal that goes over scope, timeline, and budget. It'll also define what's out of scope as well. And yeah, that just kind of makes it really clear for the client, yeah, kind of what our expectations are on either side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very wise. Similar, we do send besides the proposal, if it's a large project, we'll also do a service agreement that just goes into detail about various items, but basically put everything in writing up front so that people know where we're going with them.
So it sounds like to both of you, the quote unquote onboarding process really starts before the contract is even started. So I guess before we talk more about onboarding, let's kind of define our terms. What does onboarding mean to both of you?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think that if rapport is established with the client ahead of time, that's really, most people don't list that as onboarding, but that's really the main step. Because if you establish a good relationship with the client and you have one or two initial sessions with them and talk about their project, talk about their needs, find out a little bit about them and their company, that sort of thing, you're establishing rapport, you're beginning to understand where they're coming from. And that is really the foundation of a good onboarding process, because at that point, once you've established the fact that, hey, we are, business associates, friends, connecting over this project, then at that point, the onboarding process is not a process that you're walking people through. It's just like saying, okay, let's move forward now. You've indicated you want to do this, so here's the steps we go through to make it happen. So really think that establishing that rapport is first and foremost step.
And what about for you, Courtney?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And yeah, I probably start my onboarding process even in sort of the initial kind of screening or temperature check phase where, both the potential client and I are both, talking with each other and making sure kind of we're a good fit. And yeah, from there, it's, like you said, all about kind of rapport and relationship building. And yeah, it's been definitely a big key to my success, kind of being able to retain clients and yeah, just keeping strong connections.
Exactly. In the age of remote connectivity, the chance to at least talk to a client video, as we're doing here, makes a big difference, because people look in their eye and I had one client say to me recently, okay, I think I can go forward. I think I can trust you. So it's like, okay, so it's just that matter, like I had to, in her mind, establish my trustworthiness before she wanted to move forward. So it makes a big difference.
And so that I think raises another question to me in terms of that automation that you mentioned, William, and also kind of to what you were talking about, Courtney, in terms of how that process starts and continues through the start of the contract. So how much of your process right now is automated versus is done by quote unquote hand or done by video conferences or in-person conversations?
Of the onboarding process?
Yeah, of the onboarding process.
Mm-hmm. We've got 9 steps that we go through right now, and I do a couple of them, but I also have an assistant, and she basically takes care of that. She sends the welcome email and the service agreement. She makes sure that that we're set up with whatever sort of contact information we need to move forward with the project. So it's automated for me because she does it, but somebody has to get it done.
Gotcha. And what about for you, Courtney?
Yeah, I would say at this point, a lot of it is still kind of done by hand. I do have actually for budgeting, I have an algorithm that I use that I kind of plug in what I think the first draft will take, and it'll kind of add additional hours and provide a budget range, incorporating, project management and client communication and things like that. Actually, currently my husband's helping me build an automated kind of web app that will sort of make a lot of it, more seamless and integrated. And that will kind of combine, both kind of a web form as far as getting initial client requirements and uploading, project files and kind of sending over, a service agreement or a proposal and things like that.
Excellent.
That's really interesting that even though that for both of you that there's a lot of like by hand or in-person work kind of associated with it, it is, at least it sounds like by now, down to a bit of a science or down to like a mythology of this is what you do and this is how you do it. This is the information you need to collect. So how long did it take you to get to this point where it's a bit of a or easier or more thought out methodology around onboarding?
Well, I'm a slow learner, so it took me 8 years. Just made a new change this past quarter. We added in a client portal for people to connect in and check the status of their projects. But it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely still learning new things every day and learning kind of more things to clarify with clients as I go along. So yeah, still learning.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. I feel like that's everything that I do with freelancing or with my own business, which is as you go forward with it, every new client presents a new challenge that makes you think, okay, well, that's the one I got to bring over to the everything else that I do and make sure to readjust. Which is why I was personally very excited for this event at this time, because this time is usually my time at the end of the year to reevaluate how I do everything and rethink how not only I work and what my processes look like, but what I could be doing better, or looking back at the last year and thinking what needs some more answers or what needs some more questioning and some finagling there. So for both of you, it sounds like as you are learning and iterating on it, how do you make updates to your onboarding processes, and what do those updates look like, especially if for both of your businesses that it's more than just you at this point?
Well, for us, what does it look like? What do the changes look like? Specific question.
Yeah, either what do the changes look like, or how do you iterate that process if, like you said, your assistant's helping you with a lot of the stuff?
Well, we built our own basically CRM system here, and one of those has some checklists, and so we've got our 9-step process, and it allows us to adjust that. We can easily add and change items we want to do. If something doesn't work out so well, we put it in notes. She or I can both open it up and take a look at it. So I just added one today and popped it in the middle of the list. So It has to be in writing, otherwise you forget. You have to go through a checklist. You have to ask yourself each and every step along the way. And I've found, don't skip anything, because I always think, well, for this client, I don't maybe need to do step 3, and then I regret it after the fact. So like, those lists are there for a reason. I don't think it'll, this one will be needed for that client, but don't do it, just go through it. And I may say something like, well, this may not apply to you, but this is our process, 1, 2, 3, 4, go through it. Otherwise I'll usually regret it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say kind of echoing off, just getting everything in writing. So I wrote out with our account manager, wrote out a process map so that every step, again, so I don't forget anything and everything's clearly laid out. And yeah, we're small and agile. So, as we encounter kind of new challenges or things we haven't seen before, yeah, we're able to kind of pivot or readjust our onboarding steps. And yeah, I would say, yeah, everything in writing. We just started doing the service level agreement as well on top of the Upwork contract, just so that everything's just clearly laid out in writing.
Exactly. Yeah, the Upwork contract doesn't necessarily cover everything or the specific unique items that might relate to my particular industry. So I found the same thing. Upwork contract is great, but it's good to have our own agreement of work as well.
All right, well, I have a lot more questions for both of you, but I do want to open it up to our audience and answer some of their questions that they've been submitting so far. For anyone that hasn't figured it out already, head on over to the Q&A box and feel free to throw in some questions, and I'll be going through them and trying to ask our 2 panelists about them. So we're going to start out with this question from Fiona, which is, you've touched on this a little bit, but Fiona asks about how you get a true idea of the scope of work when sometimes, especially for their field within research and stats, some things don't always come to light until after the contract is started and you start to get into the weeds of it. Yeah. So how do you take that into your onboarding process and into your contracts as well?
Mm-hmm. Courtney, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would say I encounter definitely the same sort of issue where, a presentation might not be fully kind of finished or content be finalized. And so more and more comes in and what was initially expected has really changed. Normally in that case, I will try to, I prefer to push for hourly, if I'm working on it, just so that there's that flexibility. What I will do is kind of define the scope from my initial understanding. And then, as kind of the scope increases or changes, I usually will hop on a call with the client or in writing, just kind of discuss, just kind of what additional hours or resources it might take to get it done.
Exactly. Yeah, we're very similar. We have a written proposal. And we state a couple of different times and ways in the proposal that we work on an hourly basis, and that any changes to this proposal will change the estimated rate and probably go up for the cost, because every single project, someone always had, there's never been, in my experience, a case where someone completely summarized everything they needed done. There's always, before we started, there's always something else. And so I just let them know that if they add other things, there will be an add-ons. Some industries, industrial industries, will call it, change orders and things like that. That term doesn't really work so well with us. I just call it add-ons or adjustments. And so let them know that this is the proposal. Each of the lines are what's being covered. If you don't see something in this proposal, it's not included. And so if you add something else, cost will go up.
And this is going into a bit of our next question, but from Liz, but I think kind of taps into that, what you just said, William, especially of how do you manage those expectations early on? And as those expectations sometimes change with the proposals or with those add-ons, how do you keep those consistent throughout?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, but it's all about the communication with people. We as a company almost never do a project-based Upwork project, a fixed price Upwork project. We almost always go, and even if they're asking for fixed price at the beginning, I just have a free consultation, tell them what, this is, we think it's going to take more than your fixed price, because it always does, okay? Whatever the client's budget is always less than what they need done. So anyway, we always go for hourly, and we express that. But at the same time, I don't want to, sort of nickel and dime people to death and say, oh, that wasn't included, I'm going to throw that in yet. So you have to be just really judicious about the whole thing. Try to in the original estimate, put in enough cush time for extra changes, which are going to be coming up anyway. Client meetings, as Courtney's mentioned already. The project management, you have to factor that in as part of your original proposal, and that at least will give you a little bit more flexibility, so that you only need to respond if they ask for a little something, no big deal. But if it's a big project, let them know this is actually a pretty big ask here I'm going for right now.
And yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of that, kind of keeping status updates throughout the project. So if it does look like, we're approaching, the budget limit, before I'll even continue any work, I would prefer to reach out to the client and be like, hey, like, are we able to kind of increase the budget by X due to Y, and get approval on that, just so there's not any sort of surprise or anything like that. And yeah, normally clients do approve it. So I found just kind of keeping lines of communication open works well.
And that's where the original part of, if you establish trust and rapport at the beginning, you're talking to a human being, they understand they're not talking to a machine. These are two human beings trying to work together, communicate together. Then it's much easier to do, as Courtney said. Sometimes you have to go in there and say, we need an increase, please.
So do you both, since you both mentioned this rapport and established that very early on, do you both have calls with each of your prospective clients before you even start working with them?
Yes, almost always, yes. I'm almost always give one or two free sessions where we'll just talk about the project. And if it's a matter of trying to scope out the project, we'll talk about it. If they start asking detailed questions, or they've got their developer in there and they want some consultation advice from me, then I say, at this point, you need to hire me on Upwork, so that we can really give you the goods.
And yeah, I would say probably 90% of the time I have an initial talk as well. And yeah, I've been fortunate to keep kind of my long-term client rate at just under 50%. So yeah, once you establish that relationship, they've been clients, you think it'll just be one PowerPoint, but we've ended up working together for years. And,
Right.
they even, we'll meet up and go to dinner, or they'll send over a wedding present. I appreciate it. But yeah, we really have just, become, just close partners and working together.
That's amazing, especially those wedding gifts. Awesome. So we do have a couple people, William, asking about your 9-step process. Are you comfortable sharing what each of those steps are?
Sure. They probably won't relate to a lot of people, but I'd be happy to share it. Should I share my screen?
Yeah, you can if you want.
Okay, I'll just do that. And here and here. All right. Are we seeing that then?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So we just do our welcome email with our values, who their developer will be, tell them about the client portal. We update, this is our personal CRM that I built here, FileMaker, and then we send the service agreement. And then if they're not Upwork, we do a deposit. If they're Upwork, they just pay us, hire us directly through there. We make sure they're set up for licensing, hosting. We send them the onboarding document using DocuSign, and that's beautiful. And then we finally send them real details about how to use the client portal down there. So let's put them down there. And it was number 2 here was the one I was referencing. Send the service agreement was the idea that I thought many times I didn't have to send it, but it's just good to clarify everything up front. So
I
that's it.
like how I like how easy it is to see, and it really is just that checklist there.
Mhm.
For me, I also use a checklist, but my checklist is a little more. It works for me. It doesn't work. It doesn't look as pretty, but I think the goal of it is the same, of just trying to fill out each of those questions to make sure that you really understand not only what the client is looking for, but that they also understand what you're able to provide, the extent or the scope of that. And I think a lot of conversations help out, just make the whole process go easier. So to your point, Courtney, of the long-term clients, I also have a few of those and I love working with them. But even when I'm starting a new project with them or continuing an old project, I like to have some of those conversations just to reiterate some of our goals and
Mhm.
talk about those expectations. I think that helps a lot.
Absolutely.
So we've got a couple more questions coming in here. There's a couple people that were asking about, since they're a little on the newer side to Upwork and newer side to freelancing, what they can, or where they can turn to kind of for resources for building out their own onboarding process. So are there any tools that you didn't custom build, or any tools that, or places that you use to learn and to improve your onboarding processes?
Yeah, so I would say from a tools perspective, I use a variety of tools, including Dropbox, Business, G Suite. I use Calendly for scheduling client calls, although I know Upwork has just added a scheduling feature. Because I travel a lot, I use TimeBuddy, which coordinates across time zones.
Okay.
For time tracking, I use Harvest. I use Asana for project management, keep track of everything. Yeah, so a litany of tools. But yeah, as far as resources, I definitely, I would say just kind of trial and error, but I definitely think there have been some blogs out there that have kind of discussed it. I know I was recently a part of a book called Mastering Upwork that kind of talked about the onboarding process and just kind of all the nitty gritty about getting started on Upwork, in the podcast as well.
Wow. Wow, that's cool. Yeah, we use Zoom, Loom, and Slack, big tools for communication. And in terms of just, I think that's probably it. Those are the three main tools that help us keep track of everybody.
That's a lot of tools from you, Courtney, but and similarly for you, William, I know that you also have your custom built tools.
Mhm.
So I think that is really helpful for some people to get a start with, or start building out their own process. As we're on that same thought of people that are new to freelancing and bring on their first few clients, if they had to ask 3 questions, or even just one question of every new client of them, doesn't matter the industry, do you have any recommendations?
Always, what's your budget? What's your timeline? Get those expectations down. Recently, I didn't ask that question for a client, and then they were like, constantly saying, "What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?" It's going, "Well, we're working away on it." And he said, "Well, I actually need this done by, like Friday." Oh, he didn't tell me that, dude. So I didn't ask the question. He didn't tell me. So it's always important to get the timeline, get the budget. I don't know what the third question would be. I bet Courtney knows.
I would say timeline is number one, although the answer is normally yesterday. But as far as other questions, I like to get a sense of what is, I usually ask more about what their company is, and just kind of get a sense of who the client is, and then also who the audience is for the deliverable, and then also how it'll be presented. Whether it's going to be printed or emailed or web call or in person, that all greatly affects, at least in the presentation design industry, how I'll kind of tackle the work. And then just as a general question, I like to make sure that the client has kind of their content finalized. I happen to have, at least this year, kind of encountered a lot where they kind of were looking for me to do content creation or content editing, which isn't really in my wheelhouse. So I've started to be more clear as far as kind of what my skills and strengths are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really helpful. I think the only question I would add or that I personally like to ask of all my clients is, what does success look like? Or another way to ask that is, how do I get you jumping up and down and screaming, Neal's the greatest? And I find that sometimes it lightens up the mood a bit, but it also helps us really focus on what's that end goal there. What are they looking for? To your timeline question, William, sometimes I think that helps them say, you know what, because when they define that and they say, oh, it's actually in 2.5 months, or it's, you know, on Christmas Eve or something, it's good for me to then say, well, actually, I think we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing to mention, that as we are getting into the holiday season, I definitely recommend that everyone, if you are taking time off, make sure to let your clients know when you're available and when you're going to be able to respond to some of their questions or do some of the work that you're doing or update some of those timelines. So I guess another question here would be, what happens when or if you need to adjust the contract based on, you know, you got into it and it's taking more time, you ran into delays, what does that look like?
You need to adjust the contract?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I mean, for us, it's usually we try to hold off until there's a large project task adjustment coming up, and at that point we have to have the conversation. We can usually absorb small little changes along the way, but something big is just the point to say, okay, is this something you want right now? Is this a wish list item for later? Many times what I'll say is, okay, that's a great phase 2 item, so let's save that, because they've got, you know, we build out the basic functionality for them, and then they say, oh, could it also do this? And we say, sure, it could. Let's put that on phase 2. And that way we've clarified it. And when we send them, you know, we don't have to worry about adjusting the current proposal. We just say, okay, that's going to be a new proposal under phase 2.
It's a good idea. Normally what I'll do is after having the conversation, and if the request is approved, then they'll either, you know, I'll just make a note as far as kind of what the total amount of hours allotted are. If it's a flat rate fee, normally they'll add just an additional milestone to kind of cover that. Also, if they do decline, you know, I'm not going to leave necessarily a client in the lurch or unfinished, but I will kind of express to them like what needs to be prioritized. You know, if you're looking for like a lot of razzle dazzle, but unfortunately there's only a few hours left, kind of what, you know, key slides should I focus on, or, you know, just making adjustments like that.
Okay.
Cool. And so we do have a question from Mike about building the trust and rapport with clients. How do you do that through Zoom, and how do you do that in a quick video call?
I mean, yeah, we always do it by video because I think it's really tough to establish rapport unless you get that video connection with people. Basically, you've got to care. You've got to care for them and their company. You've got to watch out and say, I want to assist you in being successful in your business. You're not just hiring me to pay me to do a project. I want your business to be more successful because of what we're doing. And so I ask them about the business, as Courtney already indicated, you know, what's your business? Who's your audience? What are you trying to achieve here? And so I want them during that time to see me as a partner in assisting them in being successful. And so I think if you feel that way, it comes through. If you're just, if the person's just another gig or a paycheck, I think that comes through as well.
Yeah, I agree. The human connection's important. And yeah, you know, we already talked about having calls, and also on the Upwork profile, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback since incorporating kind of the uploaded video, just introducing myself. I think, you know, that brings kind of a human and more connected element. And so, yeah, you know, Also, I infuse personality within my portfolio as well. I talk about my big hair, although it's actually under control today. And yeah, just kind of, bringing a little bit of that humor and just a bit of myself into the conversation.
Yeah, I do a video on my proposal letter as well, which I learned from a different Upwork seminar that I attended. So I incorporate that in.
Awesome. Was that so that video that you're talking about, is that just a Loom video or like a recorded video of yourself that you send over?
For me, this is just a Loom video that's incorporated as part of the proposal letter, so that they can not only hear what I'm writing about their project, but they can also just get to know me a little bit.
Very cool. Awesome. I hope that was one of my events, but I'll give credit to whoever ran that one.
You were the ambassador. I don't remember who the person was, but it was about, getting proposals that win or something like that.
Awesome. Very cool. Great. So we do have a couple more questions here. Sorry, just lost my place there. So William, this question is for you of when a client initially asks for a fixed price project, but you know that from your own experience that you prefer to do it hourly, how do you suggest changing that over, or what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, if they insist on, I let them know, I've got my hourly rate, and I say, well, for this, for this project that you're hoping to get done in X number of dollars, that would actually cover, 12 hours of my work or something like that. So if it went beyond that, we'd have to go to hourly. So I'm basically trying to establish up front that this would be an hourly agreement with them.
Gotcha. Okay. And so for Courtney, for yourself, you have a growing team and there's other people involved in some of your projects as well. How do you onboard those new talent or those new team members? And William, don't worry, you're next.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So yeah, I treat it like a traditional agency. So, I do have a hiring process. As far as kind of my core team, I've been really fortunate. I've worked with all of them since 2013. So, I was lucky for that. But as far as kind of new talent, really just kind of working with them on past projects and, seeing their work and stuff like that. And yeah, I have a 3-step hiring process, as far as interviews and stuff like that. And so, yeah, just a really formalized process. And from there, just kind of get them all set up with the tools. I forgot to mention Slack, Zoom, and Loom as well. And so that and Asana and Harvest and G Suite and Dropbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about you, William, for bringing on new talent?
Yeah. So actually, we're talking about sort of the onboarding of the talent now versus the onboarding of the client, right? Yeah. So we've got a process for that as well. The talent signs an agreement, with me, recognizing that this is my client, not theirs, basically, and here's how much we'll reimburse you for it. So we've got a process that we go through on that. And then we've basically, when the project's getting kicked off, like Courtney, I've worked with for years with some of my people. So we meet, we have a first sort of kickoff session with the client. Then once they've hired us, project kickoff, and then we bring in the developer, we bring in one of my project managers, and they meet. And then at that point, I just hand it off to them, and hopefully the project manager and the developer will make it happen. Then I just have to step in for the big milestones along the way.
As you've onboarded either new talent or as you've kind of grown your team, has that changed the way that your onboarding process of clients has worked?
I would say somewhat, and more or less kind of if I'm working with direct clients. Now with Upwork, I'm the main point of contact, but as far as kind of direct clients, I will introduce them to an account manager who will kind of initiate some of those conversations. But yeah, I would say, kind of writing creative briefs and stuff like that. Yeah, that's all a part of kind of my process internally.
Yeah, when we meet with the clients, I try to make it clear to people that it'll probably not be me doing the development. And so as a part of that discussion, I'll let them know, okay, I've got a developer who's really good at this part of it, so that they understand as we get started that although they're talking with me first, there are other people on the team who will be helping them succeed.
And so I guess part of that question, Courtney, you mentioned that you are the main point of contact, and it sounds like, William, you're also one of those main points of contact. Do you have other people on your teams that are either helping to onboard clients or helping to screen some of those prospective clients before they come on?
I do not. I'm the main prospector, sort of rainmaker for the company, and then once the person's on, at that point the project managers take it over.
Gotcha.
And yeah, exact same answer.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we do have a couple more questions here, and we do have a few more minutes. So some of these questions here, and by the way, there's a lot of amazing feedback. I definitely recommend both of you guys check out. There's a lot of people saying great answers and thank you, etc. So how do you know when a client is the right client, or when they're ready for that? Like, a client may say, like Courtney, you said they're ready to start yesterday, but how do you know when they're ready to start today, or what that looks like?
Yeah, so I have a couple of screening kind of steps. So initially, typically the work comes in through Upwork invite rather than me kind of doing proposals. So when I look through the invites, I take a look at kind of their past reviews, their experience. I look at, the budget, what their average hourly rate is paid, and just overall the job description to see if it kind of fits my capabilities. The second screening goes through the intro conversation. If I see they aren't necessarily ready with the content, then normally I'll kind of suggest, a copywriter or a copy editor that they can kind of have an initial conversation with first, get that finalized, and then come back to me. Other instances, if I see kind of it's not a good fit, I'll just let them know kind of on the onset that, maybe, we aren't quite, the right fit for their project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. I mean, looking at what they paid for other projects is a good clue about whether or not you guys are in the same financial ballpark with them. That's helpful. Deadlines is also really good. If they're saying I need this done immediately, I usually can't respond to something like that, so they're not a match. If their entire proposal request or project request is all in caps, it scares me a little bit too. Like, is this person gonna be yelling at me the whole time we work together? So things like that, you just have to pick up the clues. Also, if they say, yeah, I had this other developer on Upwork and he was horrible. Like, okay, well, I'm probably gonna be the second horrible person he hires then. So if sometimes people might not be happy, so you have to decide whether or not the person is gonna be easy to work with or not. And that's sometimes discernible through the first video dialogue. Because I had one client who told me in the first conversation, he said, if you mess up on this, I'm going to sue you. So I said, oh, okay, I'm busy. So passed on him. Yeah.
Gotcha. It reiterates, and it sounds like there's a big focus on not only getting started and making sure that that's a smooth process for you and for them, but that you're getting started with the right people. So this way it can really just filter into that good relationship. So there were a couple of questions earlier on about the process, about how you structure onboarding. Specifically, does it have a separate contract, or is it a part of all of the work that you do? How does that look in terms of when you're talking to clients about that onboarding phase versus actually starting to do that work? William, do you want to start us out?
Yeah, I mean, they have to sign the service agreement or we don't start. They have to, if we've got a written proposal, they've signed that, return it. if we get started, obviously they have to hire me on Upwork or we can't get started. So sometimes you get people who try to drag out the onboarding, say, let's meet again. I want to get a little more information from you. And then I feel like they're just starting to use me. So at that point I said, well, at this point, I think it's just time for you to hire me.
And when that actually comes into, like, after that contract started and everything's signed, it sounds like your onboarding process also extends a little bit into that because you're starting to get a lot more of their information and put the project together. How does that, differentiate or how do you set that up in terms of expectations of like, okay, now we're actually starting to put pen to paper or start to build out your system?
Yeah, I mean, once they hire us, then on that first session, say, okay, let's get your contact information, let's get your email, let's get your phone, let's get all the company addresses and things like that. So if we need to mail you anything, we can. And then we had that first session, and it's at that point where we would say, okay, we understand what it is now, we're going to get to work. So we have a kind of a kickoff session after the hiring.
And Courtney, what about for you? What does that process look like, and how do you either structure that internally or externally to your clients too?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say the onboarding is in two parts. The first part is basically pre-Upwork contract. And so that's kind of the intro call, the SOW, just kind of getting assigned approval off of that. And once that contract's kind of set, then that's when I'll begin any sort of work. So from there, I normally have a kickoff call, and that's where we kind of go into really in depth as far as kind of slide by slide, and that's when I'll start any kind of sample work as far as providing initial concepts, which I found has really greatly helped kind of as far as setting client expectations. Quite a few times there'll be clients as part of their interview process wants to see kind of one or two like free concepts or sample work. I do decline that and kind of request that a small project is in place or contracts in place before getting started.
Yeah, they're never going to be more motivated until right before they hire you, right before the work gets started. So if there's any paperwork you have to get done before they start the work, do it then.
Yeah.
Courtney, specifically, I think this may be helpful, or you may be the one that has the answer for this, which is from Roland, which is when a job post includes a number of pages, or sometimes like includes a very specific ask in there. How do you figure out what that looks like? And is that either a warning sign or what does that kind of say to you?
I mean, if it has a specific slide count, I personally am very happy because that means that kind of the scope is being more clearly defined. However, what I will do is I do request, or kind of it's mandatory for me to be able to see the deck or the project, any of the content before I get started, because there can be just such a wide range, whether it's all screenshots and they all have to be recreated, or whether it's just kind of editable text and things like that. So I love to see a certain page count.
Okay. And then we do have a couple of other questions here about long-term clients. Courtney, you mentioned that about half your clients are long-term. William, it sounds like you've been doing this for a few days, so you may also have some long-term clients.
Yeah.
How does that work in terms of, if a client is coming back, how does your onboarding process change? But also, if a client you're still working with them, do you ever have a conversation where you try to close out one contract and start a new one?
Yeah, there are times that, because I do see the one question from someone said they had a contract for a long time and the rate's pretty low now. Yeah, just have an honest conversation with the client at this point. I've worked together for a long time. I think if I'm giving you good work at this point, I need to request an X number of dollar increase per hour for what we're doing. And I'd love to be able to keep working with you. But this is kind of where it's at, and leave it as a statement, not a question, and hopefully they'll accept it.
And Yeah, absolutely. So about every year, I request a rate increase. I give myself a raise, and so yeah, what I do is yeah, I like William said, I just kind of explain that the rate is increased to X. Would love to continue to work together, and yeah, I've had some clients that I've worked with for the past 7 years or so, and yeah, I've 5x'd my rate since getting started on Upwork. And yeah, they've kind of grown along with me. And so,
Right.
yeah, I found that typically they'll say yes. Or if they can't meet the full amount, we'll kind of meet in the middle as far as a new rate.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's very important to remember that since you are your own boss, it's your own responsibility to give yourself a raise and to reevaluate the work that you're doing from time to time.
Exactly.
So with that, we have a couple more questions and a couple more minutes, but the conversation doesn't necessarily have to stop here. So there are a couple of questions in here that were a little specific to people's individual profiles or cases. And for those, I would definitely recommend reaching out to Upwork support, since they'll be the best ones that can help you looking into that contract or looking into that, that case specifically and help you work through that. Additionally to that, some of the resources that I really enjoy are the Upwork community and the Upwork blog. When I first got started, as I'd mentioned earlier, I was had a bit of a lack of processes, not only in terms of onboarding, but in terms of a lot of other areas. And I found that the blogs from other freelancers and other experts that have done it before me and what they've kind of gone through, that helped me a lot with figuring out my own thing and creating a process and kind of pulling from different ideas in different areas. And then the Upwork community as well, since that's where you can ask other freelancers, other agencies, and even clients what's working well for them and what's not. So if you do have more questions, or if we didn't get to your questions, I would definitely suggest going out to those 3 resources. With that, I do want to ask one last question. Well, before I do that, there's a lot of people here saying thank you very much. So thank you, William, and thank you, Courtney, for all of your help and all of your advice. But one last question for you is, as we're getting into the holiday season and also getting into the new calendar year, what are some of your goals, or what are you excited about as you get into transitioning into this new year, and how that reflects to growing your freelance and agency businesses?
Courtney?
Yeah, my goal is honestly to actually reduce my overall client count. This year, I've worked with almost 300 clients, so that's quite a lot. So I actually want to build longer term, relationships and contracts. And so, yeah, that's kind of the first goal. And the second goal is, yeah, I would like to hit 7 figures in a year. I promised my team we would go to Australia if so. So yeah, that's the goal.
Oh, I want to join your
Great
team.
goal.
That sounds good.
Yeah. And William, what about you? What are your goals for this upcoming year?
Yeah, when we come in the new year, we just look at, where we're at financially in the past year, what will it take to move forward for the next year and expand. And that usually the last couple of years, it's meant hiring staff. So we're going to be adding 2 more staff people in this coming year, and then hopefully be able to do even more prospecting on Upwork. It used to be, I'd put in X number of prospects a day, and then as the company grew, more and more and more. And now I'm spending a good chunk of my morning just prospecting, getting, getting more prospect jobs out there for the staff.
Nice, awesome. Well, it sounds like you both have incredible goals. Courtney, let me know when you head out to Australia, because that sounds like a fun trip for the 3 of us to reconvene on and reevaluate some of these goals. Yeah. But anyways, I do really want to thank both Courtney and William for joining us today, for lending us your brains and your experience and some of your advice. It's to me, it's tremendously helpful to not only understand what other freelancers and agency owners are going through, but kind of how they've evolved throughout the years to improve and learn through their mistakes. For me, one of the biggest learnings was to understand that it's okay to make those mistakes and figure out what, those processes are as you go along, but to start somewhere and to keep it organized. So with that, thank you very much again. I'm going to drop for everyone attending the link to this survey again in the chat. Otherwise, once we close this out, you'll be able to automatically get yourself to that survey. We do have a couple more events coming up before the year ends, so I definitely recommend checking out the Upwork events page to see what other talks we have happening. There are, I think, 1 or 2 webinars as well. And then I'll be looking forward to looking through all of your feedback to get some new ideas for the new year to figure out who's next to bring on, what are some of the more deeper conversations that you're looking to learn about, and get some more great events into the new year. So with that, thank you again, William, and thank you, Courtney.